All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Rege, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmoluk, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science.
You're listening to the All Things Data podcast. My name is Manjeet Rege, and I'm Dan. I'm joined by my co-host Dan Yarmoluk. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Manjeet.
So we have an amazing success story today. We are joined by Souleymane Kone, who is the CEO of an emerging data science consulting company based out of in Ivory Coast, Africa. Welcome, Souleymane.
Glad to be here.
So Souleymane will try and get to know his background. He grew up in Ivory Coast, and he has been working in corporate America the past 20 years or so. And about 2 years ago, his company, SEJEN, was awarded close to $2 million by the US government for setting up or increasing data science capacity in Africa. And that's an amazing success story that I believe everybody should be aware of. So Souleymane, can you begin, just talking about your background, where you grew up, and your initial days prior to coming to the US?
Thank you again for having me. I am born in the Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. My undergrad degree was in electrical engineering, and I've been working in that field for about 6 years prior to coming to the US. And while in the US, I did a bachelor degree in statistics and enrolled later on at University of St. Thomas for a master in data science.
Mm-hmm. And so what year was this when you came to US?
I came to the US in 1998. It was December 1998 and stayed at St. Cloud State University through 2002. Then worked a little bit for a few years in some very good company. I was fortunate enough to work at American Express in the strategic planning division, then at Wells Fargo, then as well the Deluxe company in Minnesota, Adobe Analytic, and finally my two most recent positions were at SuperValue and Smiths Medical.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your current entrepreneurial journey.
It's quite an interesting story. I was actually pinged by a friend out of DC who saw a solicitation by the MCC. And because he knew that I had that passion for analytics, and it's been, my bread and butter for the past 25 years, he pinged me. He said, well, there's this opportunity in analytics. Would you want to join? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to have something good here. I don't think I wanna join any kind of party right now. He was like, well, it's in the Ivory Coast. I'm like, what do you mean it's in the Ivory Coast? And he was like, well, here's the RFP. You can look at it. And indeed, it was a very ambitious project, which was right in my alley. And on top of that, in my country. So I thought that, we'll give it a strong push. And so we assembled a small team. There were 3 of us. And then we responded to that proposal and ended up winning it after 5 months of RFP responses.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the RFP and your company, which is SEJEN, right? Or SEJEN? What's the correct pronunciation?
The name of the company is SEJEN, and SEJEN is actually a local name for the hornbill, a local hornbill, which is a bird. And that hornbill in sub-Saharan Africa is seen as the symbol of intellectual power. That's why we picked the name SEJEN for the company. And SEJEN is a data science consulting firm, which is headquarters in Africa. And the goal of that RFP that was launched by PEPFAR, I'll talk about that institution in a few minutes, but administered by the MCC. The goal of that initiative was to increase local capacity in country. They noticed that there were a lot of issues in the country that were barrier to development, and some of those were poor supply of data, poor demand of data, and in the middle, poor talent being able to actually manipulate that data and turn that into insight and to support decision making.
And this was specifically for the Ivory Coast, right? Souleymanes, so can you describe the size of Ivory Coast? We Americans or North Americans think of Africa holistically, but there's a lot of different countries, a lot of different resources, and what are the particular, pain points, or how are they addressed with the RFP, and how would you describe, the development of this acumen in Ivory Coast particularly?
Thank you. The Ivory Coast actually tried to participate in a few initiatives that actually measures the evolution of using data to actually support decision making, both in government and private sector. Some studies were done where private sector entity or financial institution were complaining about the lack of data, and then when there was data, it wasn't always in numerical format. And then when it was in numerical format, they didn't have enough talent locally in order to be able to make sense of it. And that, of course, impacted a lot of decision, whether it's investment, whether it's budgeting, whether it's healthcare, and so what have you. And then the MCC was like, maybe in order to help that country grow, we need to be able to give them the talent that will help them with the technology piece and also with the analytics in order to have better decision making. Because it's not that those countries are not rich. Those countries are very rich, but very often the amount of money collected is misused. Misused for a couple of reasons. Number one reason could be, a corruption, but there's also a misuse that is due to inability to actually support good decision making.
Right. And can you describe the talent pool in Africa? My work in China, has always been, a lot of it has been around hardware, but the lineage of China has always been around strong science and engineering backgrounds. Can we say the same for Africa? As there's more emphasis on the STEM classes over there, and that you have a raw talent pool to be able to tap into?
That is absolutely correct. But conversely to China, the Ivory Coast doesn't have the infrastructure to actually transform, in finished good. Would it be computers? Would it be chips? Would it be any type of mechanization? But now the data revolution has been actually a huge opportunity for Africa. As you pointed out, we've been doing STEM for a long time now. So with that opportunity regarding analytics and decision science, data science, it's really the only raw material here is your brain. And then, a lot of Africans are very strong in math, strong in physics, strong in mathematics, and all those other quantitative fields. So I believe it's a huge opportunity today to tap into in order to grow data science in several fields of application, beginning with agriculture, which is the bread and butter of that country. I don't know if you knew, but the Ivory Coast is the #1 producer of cocoa, third world producer of coffee, and until about a year ago, became the first producer of cashew, raw cashew nut. So very agricultural country, but how do you explain with all that money that is realized from agriculture that we still don't have the return that we expect the local people to have? And we believe that there's a room for analytics to help tell that story and basically elevate all those social good benefits.
So one last question, Souleymanes, on the educational front and resources. How has been this transition? Because we can see that there's a great talent pool. I have worked with your team on North American projects, and it's been fantastic. I mean, I can see the talent. So is there a little bit of a gap in software engineering, just tools and computers and the latest software? I can imagine the ramp up is very fast, right, with those kind of skills. Or is there not much of a gap in software engineering in Africa?
Well, there is and there isn't, and I'm gonna say why I think that there is. There is because, uh, especially in the case of the Ivory Coast, which is a francophone, a French-speaking country, uh, embracing data science, which is a majority English-based language, has become a barrier for a few people. So in our curriculum recently, we've developed English for data science that we'll try to give to people so that they can be comfortable with that language before they actually formally enter the software engineering program. Software engineering has been around in the country for more than 30 years. So we have some good programmers, but as you know, it's not enough today to become a data scientist. You need a lot more tools than that. So that's why I say yes, it is and it isn't. So the raw skill, the technical skill, they have it, but being able to understand and translate that into value is not always a smooth climb.
Well, look, translating any kind of data science into value is a tough nut for millions of people around the world. That is not just an African issue. I mean, that's an issue for everyone trying to work in digital disruption. So we're going to see some interesting results coming out of Africa in general, and with Souleymane with regards to SEJEN. So can you describe some of the projects that you want? Like, what is the breakdown of private versus government projects that you guys have been working on according to the grant that you received? And then, as you're describing where you started, where do you hope to go, Souleymane, in terms of that distribution? I mean, do you want to do a wide array of projects? Do you want to do government as well as private? Or are you starting to find that you have an interest in certain kind of specialties? Whether that be Internet of Things, whether that be cloud architecture, or like what are you thinking of? Short, medium, long term.
Thank you. Actually, we currently, our split is about 70-30. 70 being busy on the grant, basically with the social good aspect of things, trying to grow the ecosystem. That means developing the talent pool of several government entity, NGOs, trying to raise awareness around open data initiatives, why it's important to open those data, and how it can benefit the entire ecosystem. So that has been the 70% that has been occupying us. But we had some 70%, 30% success with some private companies. Among some of those companies, we have the Port Authority. The Port Authority in the Ivory Coast is one of the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. And then they receive quite a few boats. They have limited amount of docks. They have a limited amount of dockers. And then that creates some interesting statistics and capacity challenges that we've been helping the port to resolve. We've also helped them with some dashboard and some KPI. We partner as well with the Ministry of Education to help them put together a model that will help them decide where they need to build new schools. There is a need of about 1,700 schools in the country. I'm talking about middle school at this point. There's a need of 1,700, but the country can finance them all. So they had to use an objective tool in order to decide which village or which locality was going to receive a school, because of course they're all competing for it. And then we want to make sure that we reduce bias and we reduce influence, because before it was people basically decided to have a school in a certain location because they want to run there as an elected official. But with that tool that we developed, which is a combination of analytics and also geospatial intelligence, now with the push of a button, the government has the need-based location for the school that they need to build. We work on some other interesting problematic with some PEPFAR partners. As you know, PEPFAR is very big on eliminating HIV worldwide. but they have some tough challenges on the ground, and a lot of those challenges are rooted in data. PEPFAR are those metrics that they call the 90-90-90, making sure that 90% of the people who are susceptible to the disease know their status, making sure that those 90 are under treatment, and make sure that the 90% of those under treatment have suppressed the viral charge within a year. And we try to help PEPFAR basically getting quality data in order to support that story, monitor and surveil their program so that they can achieve ultimately that success in the country.
So, Souleyman, can you just explain some of these acronyms? I don't think most people might be aware of, like PEPFAR, or, I mean, speaking to you offline,
Yes.
things like MCC. If you can just give us a lay of the land, and also which branch of the government award, the grant, and all of those aspects as well.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. The PEPFAR is the President Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's a federal government entity that sits in DC. And the MCC is the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And that also is a federal government entity who fight to eliminate poverty via education. So those two entities came together to create a program that they call DCLI, Data Collaborative for Local Impact. And the first initiative of DCLI was done in Tanzania. And the Ivory Coast is the second wave of that program. So PEPFAR, to help fight HIV via data, has put together a $21.8 million fund to help throughout the African country find partners that can help implement data changes, data literacy training, data technologies, to help reduce the spread of HIV.
And then this grant award that you got was specifically for Ivory Coast, and then there are many such initiatives. You said this was a second wave, but there are many such initiatives forthcoming in the other parts of Africa as well.
That's our hope. I mean, we've seen a few listed, but as you know, everything is through competitive bidding. So for all those opportunities that we see and that we seek, we basically have to fight hard for them. We're not the only top dog in town. There's a lot of people that are interested in those opportunities, and they're all open to people worldwide, not just African companies. So it makes it a very competitive bidding process. But yes, we are actively seeking those opportunities to continue growing the pipeline for SEJEN. I don't know if I mentioned, but SEJEN is currently housed in the Regional Center of Excellence, which is the National School of Statistics. And that National School of Statistics is basically the center who is training statistician and econometrician for 23 African countries. So when SEJEN becomes successful, our goal is to deploy into those countries with our partner NCEA, which is that Regional Center of Excellence.
So let's talk about some of the local impact that has already happened in the past 2 years, and some of the groundwork that you have already done. Would it be possible for you to just tell us, the things that you've achieved in the past 2 years?
Yes, we basically started by putting boots on the ground, right? So we started by training a team of trainers, right? So that team of trainers was composed, it was 8 engineers, 4 of them statistical engineers, the other 4 software engineers, and we gave them data science training. With that data science training, in turn, those 8 fellows basically trained 90 different individuals. But the enthusiasm in the country was so high, for each cohort of 30, we had about 2,000 applicants. So it was a very selective process in order to select those 30 per cohort, because we did 3 of them, and train them into data science. We gave them a crash course in data science that lasted about 2.5 to 3 months. And then we placed them into some NGOs and some government entities. I'm pleased to report that 65% of those people that were placed were retained by the companies. And where they were not retained, it was not because they were not strong, it's because some of the government entities can only hire through a government initiative, which is some type of exam, a government exam. That's the only way that you get into those in those divisions. So those remaining fellows, we put them into a subsequent program, which we call the 23 experience. PEPFAR has more than 400 sites in the Ivory Coast, and we just wanted to make sure that we can equip a few sites with some tools, with some skills, and try to measure the difference between the sites that received the treatment and those that didn't. And that experience will end maybe within a couple of months, and we'll have some exciting results to share. We've done also some conferences. One of them was the Women in Data conference, where we saw a very big enthusiasm from the female community. We had more than 400 participants during that day, and the panel was composed of only female CEOs and directors, and they had some very interesting challenges and discussion with the different participants. We also had a hackathon, and the winner of the hackathon was a group of the female who actually developed an app to basically help reduce teenage pregnancy. So some very good early impact that we're seeing from that initiative. We also did a conference that we call Data Day that talks a little bit about the field of data science and the benefit that it can bring. And also it was the opportunity for us to actually showcase our continuing education track. Because as you know, SEJEN is also branching into becoming a online education institution. So where we see each other, we see ourselves going in the future is going more into that 30 split, where 30% is going to remain into serving public good, where there will be another 30% that is going to be devoted to serving folks in education, both continuing education and the youth, and the remaining 40 are going to be spent on private sector and financial institution. The last word that I'll add on that side is that we have 10% of SEJEN corporation coming back to a foundation, which will continue that mandate of social good.
So Souleymane, we understand the public, we understand the kind of the educational, mission. Can you tell us about some interesting projects that you're doing on the private side in Ivory Coast? Or is it the Ivory Coast, or is it global, or is it African centric? Can you describe those type of projects or initiatives you're working on?
Sure. We have a couple of interesting initiatives that are developing in country, in the private sector. One around the insurance industry. The insurance industry today, in order to do their reconciliation when there is an accident, is a very lengthy process because it's not online hosted. There's no platform today that allow them to basically exchange pictures of the incident and basically do compensation. So those compensation today take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So we're in consultation with the insurance company in order to build a platform for them. There's a couple of banks that we're working with in order to help alleviate fraud. Some people are taking loans and not repaying those loans. So we're developing a scoring model in order to help those institutions basically reduce the fraud or the delinquency in their department. I mentioned the Port Authority and the work that we're trying to do for them. That starts all the way from the BI realm with building infrastructure, dashboarding capability, but also some very interesting analytics going from name matching all the way to space utilization when it comes to docking, to make sure that the boat will spend the minimum amount of time when they're in country in order to reduce the cost. An interesting component in the private sector too is the outsourcing model that we're trying to develop. SEJEN has not acquired, but as an office in DC in order to get closer to our American clientele, because we believe that we can also support that segment of the population. And we've developed an IoT application that allow company to be able to read information coming from device located anywhere in the world and embedded some anomaly detection in those reading in order to help them being more predictive in the maintenance of assets. We are also working with some law firms, and I won't share any names, in order to help them control revenue from the lawyers and help predict the workload and bring more efficiency into their pipeline. So those are a few examples that I can give quickly. We're exploring some other avenues, but the private sector will be split 50-50 between the outsourcing and the local market.
You know, Souleymane, you also had that background in the medical industry of supply chain analysis. I mean, just from your previous life and what you have merged with data science, do you have other things that you would really like to work on? I know you have limitations in terms of time, but are there some cool things that you would like to kind of have any kind of pet projects on and look at problems? Because your mind is a little bit different today than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Absolutely. One of my passion is into education, coaching, and for that we are contemplating developing some application using VR technology in order to bring more learning to a lot of TVET school in Africa, where people are not able to afford the equipment needed for them to be trained properly. So we believe that VR will be a very good alternative as it will make it more real than basically the current abstract environment in which they learn. So whether it's to drive machinery equipment or tooling equipment, today a lot of those kids in Africa, they just hear about it or see a picture in a book. And we believe that by bringing that inside virtual reality, we can not only capture some interesting analytics from their reaction to some of those tooling, but we can also expedite the time it will take them to be on the actual equipment. It's just like a flight simulator that we want to bring to all those industrial technical training that are developing in country.
Souleymane, some of the projects that you mentioned, you're working both in US as well as in Africa, and you're open to taking on more projects in US so that you can leverage some of the great skill set and your workforce that you're developing in Africa as well, right?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Great. So, if people want to learn more about you, about SEJEN, let's say they wanted to reach out in some ways, what do you prefer? Is there a URL they should be looking up SEJEN, or what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I can be reached on social media. For example, on LinkedIn, it will be LinkedIn/Souleymane.Kone, or it will be via our website, which will be www.sejen.ci, CI like Côte d'Ivoire, or it can be via Twitter. Again, you'll be at SEJENCI. So those are a few of the social network where we can be reached out, and we make it a point to respond within the 24 hours, and we monitor that very seriously.
So we spell SEJEN as SEJEN.ci. That's the URL for this great upcoming data science consulting company led by Souleymane Kone, who was our host, who was our guest today. Thank you, Souleymane, for joining us. And I'm sure that all of our listeners would find value in listening to your success story.
Thank you again for having me.
Thank you.